Hey everybody, it's Courtney and I am making a card today using the Club La La Land stamp kit. This is a monthly subscription and I just recently started subscribing to it. I'll also be using the Just For You background stamp. Now I am starting off with a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and I used the Simon Says Stamp Stitch rectangle die. This is the second to largest. And I'm stamping down my image with Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink. And I'll go ahead and mask her with a piece of Eclipse masking paper. Next, I will take out my Misty for my background stamp. I used a little bit of Tombow Mono multi-glue and just spread that around with my finger. That way it'll be repositionable. This is just in case I have to stamp my background more than once. My paper won't move around. I went ahead and adhered that card panel right down to the bottom of my Misty and lined up my background stamp. And I'll be stamping with Hero Arts Soft Blossom ink. Now you can also stamp this like you normally would with a background stamp, where you would lay it face up on your work surface and place your card panel down. But I just figured this would be easier for this particular panel. Next, I'll go ahead and remove my mask and we'll move on to the Copic coloring. I'll start off with her skin here, and I'm usually start with my lightest color, but I grabbed the wrong marker. This is actually my lightest mid-tone color, but it'll all be covered up anyway. This is just to kind of lay out my darkest areas. I'm going to pretend as if my light source is in the top right-hand corner. I learned to color by watching Kelly Letivola videos, and that is where her light source is, so I kind of just got into that habit. So the shadows will be underneath where her hair is hanging over her face, underneath her little chin, where her arm is tucked behind her a bit, and off to the left-hand side. So where the little straps of her dress, the shadows would be off to the left. Once I had my darkest color down, I went ahead and just extended that out a little bit with my darkest mid-tone color. Now there are going to be areas like her right arm there is pretty much hidden by the flowers that she's holding, so there's not going to be a whole lot of highlight there. So don't feel like every single area you'll have to use all 4 colors. You can pretty much get away with the smaller areas using just 2 or 3. Next, I went in with my lightest color and blended that all out. And I will take my R20 marker just to add a little bit of color to her cheeks. And I took that E13 just to do 2 little curved lines there where her nose would be, just to add a little bit of dimension to her face. And then went back in with my lightest color and blended that out once again. Normally I jump right into her hair, but she has a little bow in her hair, so I want to color that first, just so that I don't accidentally color that as if it was her hair. So I'm starting off with my lightest color, and these are going to be the same colors I use for her little dress as well. My darkest areas will be where that bow is kind of bunched up in the center, and I'm just doing 2 larger flicks in the center and then smaller flicks on either side, just to kind of give that bow some dimension. Now this is a great image whether you're just starting to color with your alcohol markers or whether you're pretty advanced. It leaves a lot of open space to kind of play around and practice blending, practice flicking. So these images are really great. Once I had all my colors down, I went in with my lightest color, which is my BG11. Now I sometimes have a hard time blending the BG13 and BG11, so I'm going to use the tip-to-tip technique here, and I'll get into more of that once we get to her dress. But once I had the bow done, I went ahead and moved on to her hair. For hair, I typically start with my darkest color because I want to preserve a large highlight and those flicks I want to maintain as much as possible, so I don't want to over blend here. I'm starting with just one section at a time here, and this little piece of hair that's kind of hanging over her face, the darkest areas will be on the very tip as well as on the top of her head underneath where her little headband is. Same thing for this little piece of hair over here. Starting off with my darkest color, I'm going to kind of just outline the headband or the bow just so I don't go over it, and just extend those flicks a little bit. Same thing from the bottom up, and you want to your flicks should be in the same direction as the hair. So if your hair is curved, you want to make sure that your flicks are curved. And this takes just practice. So if you don't get it right away, just keep practicing. You want to barely be touching the marker to the paper. I'll go in with my mid-tone and flick those out a little bit more, and then with my lightest color, flicking those out, almost meeting each other in the center, just leaving a pretty large highlight. It's okay to leave a little bit of white. It'll just make it look like her hair is even more highlighted than it is. For the top of her hair, I'm basically doing the same thing. The lightest color would be right on the top of her head. Now, I didn't extend this out all the way at first. Later, I do go back with my lightest color and just color in that entire area. I didn't like leaving that white there. Now for the rest of her hair, I am starting on the top, flicking down a little bit. And you don't want to put two dark areas right directly next to each other. So where those two little pieces of hair are hanging in front of her face, I'm trying to avoid putting my E59 right directly next to where the E59 is of those areas, just so that they do stand out and you can tell it's two separate pieces of her hair. Behind these little flowers, I'm not worried about getting any kind of blending there. I'm just going in with my solid color because they would be darker being they're laying behind an object. For the left side of her hair, I am concentrating on the darkest area being behind her face and the bottom of her hair up. And her hair is kind of curved around, so you want to make sure that those flicks are going in that curve. With the mid-tone, I just extended those out, and then I'll go in with my lightest color and basically do the same thing. Now, if you want to reserve your flicks and have the dimension of her hair, you don't want to overblend. You just want to quickly go over with your lightest color, extend the flicks out a little bit. It's never going to be perfect, but in the end, you'll be able to see all those highlights still and all those flicks to give it dimension within her hair. And next I will move on to her little dress here, and I'm using my BG markers for this as well, laying out my darkest areas, which will be behind these little flowers. They will cast a shadow, and then off to the right-hand side. I'm also making these little triangles basically where her dress would be gathered up a little bit. Then I will go in with my darkest color and going over those shadow areas. And with these flowers, they're pretty tiny, so you just want to use the very tip of your marker and just barely go over those areas. Off to the left, I'm just drawing a straight line and then extending those flicks a little bit. This allows me to kind of maintain that area. And there goes my cat. He did this multiple times while I was trying to record this video. Typical cat, it's like he was stalking his prey, and he would just immediately jump on the table and want to sit directly on my card. So here I'm going in with my same lightest color and darkest color for her little shorts that are underneath her shirt or her dress. Next, I'll go in with my darkest mid-tone and extend those shadows out a little bit. I'm not doing any kind of flicking on the right-hand side. I'm just creating that shadow. I will extend these little triangles out a little bit each time. Next, for my BG13, doing the same exact thing, extending that shadow behind the flowers and extending the flicks off to the left-hand side, as well as these little triangles. Last, I will go in with my BG11, and here's where I'm going to do that tip-to-tip technique as well. All you basically do is take the tip of your lightest color, touch the tip of your darker color, and start where your BG13 is on the paper and extend that out, and then you can go back and with just strictly your lightest color. Just allows you to blend it out a little bit if you're having any kind of trouble blending. For whatever reason, I struggle with the BG13 and BG11. I did have to refill my BG11, which was some of the problem with the blending, and I was able to get a much better blend. Next, for these little lines on her shirt or her dress, I'm going to do these pink and white. So I'm going in with my R81, which is very similar to the Hero Arts ink that I use for the background. And then going in with my R85 just off to the left, extending that out with my R83, and then back to my R81. I also use the R81 for this little area between the flowers. I kind of matched up the background as much as I possibly could, just so it looked a little bit more seamless and I didn't have that white gap between the flowers. For her shoes, I wanted these to appear white, so I'm going in with my C markers and just adding where the shadows will be, which will be off to the left, and where her shoe kind of gathers up there in the center. Extending that out with my C3 and then back to my C1 and leaving the right side of them white. So I'm extending from the C1 to the white and going over with no color off to the right at all. Next, for the little flowers, these are really tiny. You don't need 3 colors for these, but I'm using my RV markers for these little tulips, I believe they would be. And my shadows will just be on either side, the petals on either side where the middle petal is laying over it, and then just in the very center of the middle petal, because again, you don't want to put your 2 darkest areas right next to each other, or else you'll lose the difference between the 2 petals. For the little daisies in the center, I'm using an Y19, extend that out with a Y08, and then covering the entire thing with a Y02. Again, very tiny areas. You do not need to use 3 markers. You could get away with 2 or even 1. For the center of the flowers, I am just using 1 marker. I'll just be going in with the YR marker just to fill in the centers of the little daisies. I added just a little bit of the C1 to these white stripes on her dress just to give a little bit more dimension. I didn't want to leave those completely white. For her lips, I'll just cover those up with an R22. And I'll take a piece of Fun Foam, and I'm using my Scotch ATG gun here to adhere that to my card panel, and then I'll use the same adhesive to adhere that card panel onto another piece of Nina Solar White cut with the largest stitched rectangle, also by Simon Says Stamp. Next, for the sentiment, I am using one of the stamps in the kit, and I'll be stamping this with the Soft Blossom ink by Hero Arts that we used for the background. Now, these are rubber stamps that you cut apart yourself. So I stamped on my little scratch paper there just to make sure that I did have it lined up correctly, and then stamped on the inside of my card, adhered my card panel with Tombow Mono Multi Glue to my card base. And then I added a little bit of shimmer to her little bow in her hair, the trim on the bottom of her dress, as well as the flowers that she's holding. And that is the card for today. Thank you guys so much for stopping by, and I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.